Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Zhenya if you're new here. Today I'm going to be recapping all of the books that I read in January of 2026. I really started the year off strong. I finished 7 books this month and I read all of the books that I chose in my January TBR video. So I felt very accomplished on that front. I don't want to talk too much in this video. I want to keep it on the shorter end. So without further ado, let's actually get into the books that I read in January. I'm going to go in order of completion. So I started off my entire year by reading The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. So Marie Kondo is a professional organizer or tidier, and she is very well known for her method of only keeping the items that spark joy. I really liked this book because it gave a very straightforward and easy to follow method for actually obtaining a clean house. She claims that the reason her clients have so much success is because they follow her specific order, which is putting everything into 5 categories. So first you do clothes, and then you do books, then you do papers, and then you do kimono, which is basically any other miscellaneous items. And the final category is sentimental items. So I actually started my tidying up journey directly after finishing this book. Her methods are pretty difficult, but it's meant to be just a one-time big event sort of thing. So I had to put all of the clothes I own in the middle of the room. Literally everything piled up in the middle of the room, and then went through every item and held it in my hands and determined if it sparked joy or not. So that was a lot of fun, and I actually ended up donating like 6 giant garbage bags full of clothes. Now, I don't know, I'm a pretty type A person and I really like to follow instructions, so I don't know how well this book and method will work for everyone. I'm very nervous for the next step, which is the books. I might end up documenting my journey with that on this YouTube channel because I'm not very good at getting rid of books, but we shall see how that goes. Anyways, I rated this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I didn't give it a full 5 stars though, because I just felt like she could have mentioned donating items. I feel like she constantly just said like, put everything in a garbage bag and throw it away. But so much of this stuff has a lot of use left in it and the potential to find a home of someone who really would enjoy those items. So I just wish that she mentioned donating more, and I know I'll be donating everything that I get rid of. But yeah, I would recommend reading this book or watching the documentary on Netflix, but this is a book channel, so hey, I'm recommending the book. The next book that I read this month was The Magic Strings of Frankie Presto, and this book is by Mitch Albom. So we are following Frankie Presto on his life journey, and he is a world-renowned guitar player, and he has 6 strings that end up touching the lives of 6 individual people. At the very beginning of this book, we are told about Frankie's tragic death, and then we are going through his life story while also being told stories from people who knew him. This book itself was very interesting because it was set in a very musically dense time period in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s. So you're getting kind of a historical fiction aspect of it as well. A lot of the characters in this book are inspired by musical icons. I'm sitting on my knees, so I'm gonna go down a level. I would say that this book is perfect for people who really love music, and I will say that the beginning of it did start off pretty slow. However, as it went on, it built up and I was very engaged throughout the rest of the book. Also, something very interesting about this book is that the narrator is music, and it is kind of a magical realism book, so I liked that aspect of it as well. And I gave this book 4.25 stars. Next, I read The Science of Stuck, Breaking Through Inertia to Find Your Path Forward. This is by Britt Frank, and it is a science-based self-help book. Britt Frank gives us a toolkit for breaking through what is really holding us back in life. I liked this book because it did a great job at reminding you that you're not crazy and having us pause for a moment and just reminding us that our brains have a reason for feeling the way that we do. This was definitely the best self-help book I've ever read. I think that it really helped me realize a lot about myself. Also, at the end of each chapter, there are 5-minute challenges or 5-minute exercises, and I thought those were a great way at very quickly applying what you learned in each chapter. I know that I am definitely going to be referencing this from time to time again this year at least, and I'm very happy to report that it was my first 5-star read of this year. And I know if you've been here before, I don't typically rate my nonfiction, but I decided this year that I am going to start rating it because why not? I read enough nonfiction that I have a good idea of what I like and what I don't like. Anyways, moving on to the next book. Okay, next book that I read was Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. We are following a nameless heroine, and she very quickly gets swept off of her feet by a gentleman named Max de Winter. They end up quickly marrying, and he brings her back to his estate called Manderley, which is stunning. But our heroine is constantly haunted by the thought of Max's late wife, Rebecca. Okay, this book was a true page turner. I ended up feeling incredibly satisfied with this entire book, but mostly the ending and how it all wrapped up. In my eyes, this is a perfectly executed Gothic novel. So if you like books like Wuthering Heights or Jane Eyre, I just know that you're going to love this one, and I highly recommend it. Also, aside from the beautiful storytelling, the themes in this book actually tied the book together perfectly, and the themes ranged from jealousy to self-perfection to self-loathing, and it all just tied into the story very beautifully. And if you can't tell by how excited I am about this book, I ended up giving it 5 stars. So I started off the year really good. I already had 2 5-star books. Okay, the next book that I read was Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. So this story takes place over one day in London, and we are in the mind of Clarissa Dalloway, and she is constantly switching back and forth and going through memories and regrets and her fleeting thoughts, and this is a true stream of consciousness novel. Something about this book is that it's very quiet and introspective, and it really delves into what is going on beneath the surface at any given moment. I will say that Virginia Woolf is a very poetic writer, and she has a beautiful way with her words. Somehow she was constantly pulling out sentences that kind of astonished me, and it's just so amazing that humans are able to write like that. I will say that when I was reading this book, it felt kind of like I was reading Ulysses by James Joyce again, and it kind of felt like a fever dream. I did have a little bit of trouble with this one, as I have with other Virginia Woolf books in the past. I think that I could return to this book sometime in the future and get something completely different out of it, or actually enjoy the story, but for the most part, my experience with Virginia Woolf and Mrs. Dalloway specifically is it was fun to read for individual sentences, but the entire story wasn't something that I had a good time with. And I guess I wasn't bored, but I just was not engaged with the plot itself. And there isn't really a plot. You're really in her mind, and it's more about individual moments, but I just didn't have a great time with this book, which was a bit disappointing. I do appreciate this book from a literary standpoint though, and I think it's beautiful in its own unique way. So that's why I'm not giving it a super low rating, even though I didn't really enjoy it. I'm gonna give it 3.25 stars, and I know I will come back to it at some point in life. Okay, and in the same print, my next book was The Hours by Michael Cunningham. This novel follows 3 individual women, all throughout different time periods, but they're all subtly linked to each other through Mrs. Dalloway. Each woman is navigating love, loss, and how to live life and to go about life. I think that this book, a great way to describe it is intimate and reflective. I also really like that this book shows how one book and one day can just impact your lives so greatly. I think that Michael Cunningham paid homage to Virginia Woolf and Mrs. Dalloway so well that I want to read Mrs. Dalloway sooner rather than later, because it really shed a new light on the book for me. I will say that I didn't love the plot of The Hours itself that much, but I did have a more enjoyable time reading it than Mrs. Dalloway, and I was able to understand the themes a little more clearly. It's kind of stream of consciousness, but it's not the same level as Virginia Woolf's writing, and it is easier to follow from a story standpoint. I do think that the underlying message of The Hours was very beautiful, and I did give this book 4.25 stars. I think that my next reading of Mrs. Dalloway is going to be even higher now that I've read this book. So that's great. Okay, My last book that I read in January is called In the Company of Hypocrites, and this is by B. Martin. The story starts off in Kyle's mind, and he is reeling from a very sudden divorce. He is not doing well, to say the very least, doing a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, and kind of just spiraling. But suddenly, his long-term group of friends all show up at his door for a surprise visit, and it turns into a very interesting reunion. There's some words that are thrown around and some messy truths that come to light. It ends up forcing everyone to question not only the friendship, but also themselves. And then throughout the rest of this book, we are going through the minds of each of the individual friends, and then it all comes together at the end, back at Kyle's house. Okay, so this is not the kind of book that I typically read. It was, I don't want to bash this book. So a little bit about the background of it is that it is not only a self-published book, but this author, she is starting her own publishing company, because I don't exactly know the reason why, but she is located in Detroit, which is where I'm from, and I ended up getting this book from her at a attic sale, so that is how I stumbled across it. And she ended up, I don't know, she kind of was like, oh yeah, you should read this, and everyone in her family said, yeah, it's such a good book. So I don't know, I felt like I had to get it, and she ended up signing the front cover, which was kind of cool. But yeah, I just think that she did a good job writing a very entertaining story for something, I think it might be her debut novel or one of her first stories. Okay, the writing did feel a little bit cheesy at times, but sometimes that's fun. And I did have a good time, and I was very entertained. I really think that what B. Martin is doing is really cool, and I always want to support Detroit women who are hustling. So I ended up giving this book 4 stars. And I'm not rating this on the same scale as other books that I read, because it is very different and it's self-published and maybe could use a little bit more editing. I don't know, but I just think that it's really cool what she's doing, and I had a good time. So yeah, okay. That is all the books that I read in January. Here they all are. Thanks for listening to my thoughts, and I will be back soon. Hey, so you just watched my January wrap up and it's now the end of February and I never uploaded that video. So I decided I'm going to combine the two, and I'm just gonna quickly talk about the books that I read in February. I don't have as many as January. It was a pretty busy month for me, and I do have a video that will come out kind of explaining why I haven't been able to read as much and why I haven't really been posting. But you'll see that at a future date. For now, let's just go ahead and talk about the 5 books that I read in February, and I'm going to go in order that I read them. So, the first book that I read this month was The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. I read this because I was going to see the musical Phantom of the Opera, and I wanted to compare the two and see how similar they were. I already went into this book knowing the story of Phantom of the Opera because I saw it as a musical quite a few years ago. And I also went in with the preconceived notion from my best friend that this is a very dark book and, I don't know, a lot more intense than the musical is. So let me try and give a little bit of a synopsis of it without giving it too much away. So we have this opera house that the owners are switching over. So the owners have either retired or quit, and we get 2 new owners. They are taking over and they learn about the Phantom Ghost, or the Phantom of the Opera. And he is a phantom who has quite a few demands. He demands that he has a certain box seat and he gets paid, and these 2 owners are not really taking him seriously. So the opera ghost starts to kind of haunt the opera house and sabotage it. We also have our female main character, Christine, who is a backup singer or backup opera, or just kind of part of the chorus, but she is getting trained by the Phantom of the Opera, and they have a very interesting relationship. There's also another guy in this book, Raoul, and he is Christine's childhood friend, and they have a romance that's brewing at the same time. So There's a lot going on in this book, and I don't know if I just did a good job describing it, but it is like a gothic book, kind of dark, very atmospheric. It has a lot of themes of jealousy and growth, I would say. And I really enjoyed this book. I actually didn't think it was that much different than the opera. There was definitely more description in this book, and the end deviated quite a bit from the musical, but I still really enjoyed it. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. The writing itself I had a hard time connecting with, and it was very focused on the Phantom's thoughts and feelings, and they were really trying to push the relationship between Christine and Raoul, but I didn't believe it, so it made me struggle to root for them. Those are my thoughts on Phantom of the Opera. I do recommend this book, and you don't have to like musical, you don't have to watch the musicals. It's just a good read. So yeah, that was the first book that I read in February. The next book that I picked up is The Narrative of Sojourner Truth, and I got this from the library. It is supposed to be one of the best documents of slavery ever written, and Sojourner Truth is really a pioneer for women when it came to the struggles of slavery and racism, and also sexual equality. I think that this book wasn't exactly what I was expecting, and Sojourner Truth, she was telling her story to someone and it got written down by someone else. And the storytelling was very disjointed and it was kind of hard to follow, and I didn't love the writing. So I think that for me personally, I would do better learning about Sojourner Truth through other sources. However, this is her narrative, so it is a very important primary source, and I understand the importance of it. I just didn't love this read. It was pretty interesting to hear about her experiences. It did delve pretty heavily into her relationship with religion, and she was a pioneer for religion and Christianity, so it does talk a lot about that. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. It was good. I'm glad that I read it, but it wasn't amazing. Just a little bit clunky, in my opinion. But that's okay. Sometimes that's okay. Okay, the next book that I read is Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. I read this book for a book club, and I actually just had my discussion on it today, so I'm a little bit winded from talking about this book. And I also just had a discussion that was completely full of spoilers, so I don't want to accidentally give anything away from this book, but it's actually really hard to describe the plot. There's so much going on in here. But basically we have this 15-year-old boy, Kafka, and he runs away from home from his dad, and there's a lot of magical realism in this book and time travel, and time is not like a standard timeline, and I don't know how to describe that without spoiling anything. But he ends up befriending quite a few people along his journey and having to escape from the police, and there's a lot going on in here. We're also following this older man, Nakata, and he lost his memory when he was 15, and he can, well, do I want to spoil? I don't want to spoil it because it's really interesting, but he has a special skill that you'll discover if you read this book. And he's just a really sweet guy, and I loved every time that it was Nakata's point of view. I didn't care as much for Kafka. How do I describe this book without giving it away? I don't know. This book is very heavily inspired by Greek myths and retellings and Kafka writing. Oh my god, girl. You cannot chew on a library book. Sorry, this is my cat. I don't know if you could see it. Oh, but anyways, so Murakami, if you're not familiar with him, he can be very explicit with how he portrays women and writes sexual relationships. And there was a plot in this book that I really did not like, and I understand that it was integral to this book, but it heavily lowered my overall opinion on it. I ended up giving the book 2.5 stars, but that being said, I would still recommend this book if you like a mind-bending story that's not necessarily straightforward. It really does have you think outside of the box and try to figure out what's going on. It doesn't just give you all the details right then and there. So it's a really interesting book, and I like Murakami in general, but there's some, okay, his writing is so easy to follow and he's so descriptive and he's a great storyteller, but I always have the drawback of how he writes women. So go into it knowing that, and maybe if you can, try and put that aside and just follow along with his amazing storytelling. But yeah, Kafka on the Shore, I gave 2.5 stars. I hope that, I don't know, that was a really bad description of the book, I feel like. It's hard to not give things away because I feel like everything, like the book, you don't know what's gonna happen going into this. Anyways, okay, that was that book. I hope I'm not going too fast, but I already know that there's a January reading wrap up in here, so I don't want to bore you all. Hey, ow! I don't know if you could see my freaking cat, but she's chewing on me. Okie dokie. The next book that I read in February is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. This was actually my very first time reading this, and I read it with a bunch of friends at the same time. They all have read it before, so it was very nostalgic for them, but it was also really interesting to read it for the first time as an adult. So C.S. Lewis, he, to me, very clearly had this story based off of creation and Christianity and religion. So there's a lot of themes of God and Jesus in this book, but told in a children's story, which was really interesting. And I think that it was a really cute fantasy world and a very quick story that was satisfying, but also the ending made me really want to read the rest of the Chronicles of Narnia. Because I didn't have the childhood nostalgia of this book, it didn't feel like a perfect read to me. The beginning, we're just thrown right into the story. There's no history of the children or how they got to where they are. All we know is they just moved to this place and they discovered a wardrobe and they step inside. So it does get right into it. So as someone who does like a little bit of a build-up and some backstory, it kind of fell flat on that aspect of it. But I can put that aside and realize that this has a huge impact on our culture and the literary world, and it's a very important book. And yeah, in general though, I really enjoyed reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I think that I gave this 4.25 stars. The final book that I read this month is actually a play. It's called A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. I've never read this before, but I have heard quite a lot about it. So I was over at a friend's house and I saw it on their bookshelf and I just asked if I could borrow it because I really wanted to read it. This is following an ordinary Black family in Chicago, and I'm trying to think about when this takes place. I want to say it's in the 1960s. There's still racism and bigotry going on in the world. Well, there still is today, but way heavier in this time period. And this family, we follow them getting a lump sum of money and dreaming about what they're going to do with it. We have Ruth, who is the wife, and Walter, who is the husband. We also have Benitha, who is Walter's sister, and Mama, who is Walter and Benitha's mother, who lives with them as well. We also have Travis, who is Walter and Ruth's son. I don't know why I just told you all that. Their names don't really matter. This book talks a lot about identity, justice, and moral responsibility. And I do think a really big part of it is how people's dreams during the civil rights movement were constantly deferred, especially when you feel like you're moving forward, but then you realize that there's still a lot of hateful people out there who don't want you to follow your dreams and get to see your accomplishments happen. I really, really love this play. I think that as a play, I was able to envision it perfectly. The descriptions of each scene were very in-depth, very beautiful, and I immediately after finishing this book, I looked it up and I'm like, where can I go and watch this play? Sadly, the closest place was 2 hours away, so I didn't want to make the drive, but I think I'm going to watch the film. I think it's from 1961, and I'm really excited. But yeah, I really liked A Raisin in the Sun. I hope that my description of it was good enough for you to want to read it, but I highly recommend picking this up. Actually, out of all of the books that I just talked about for February, I recommend this one the most. I rated this book 4.5 stars, so very highly written. I think that if it was a little bit longer, and we got a little bit more of an explanation of what happened after, then I think I could have rated it 5 stars. I did really enjoy it though. So those are all of the books that I read in February, all 5 of them, and you just saw the January wrap up. I hope that you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on all of those books. I enjoyed talking about them and reading them, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and if you like hearing me talk about books, if you want to subscribe, that would be awesome. Leave a comment if you're new here, and I promise I will be more consistent. Well, I don't want to promise anything, but I'm going to try and be more consistent. Anyways, I will talk to you guys later. Bye! Me and my cat against the world.